Something that seems increasingly true to me is that Blizzard seems to have no idea how their characters work or how to balance them, at least in a majority of situations. Recently, we had a massive nerf to Mauga. After when he first came out, they massively buffed him and then nerfed him in absolutely the wrong ways to do so. And also just in general with their habits of seemingly randomly picking a character to turbo buff, as well as just having some of the strangest dev comments of all time. The most recent one that really stuck out to me as making no sense at all is that when they nerfed Brig in Season 8, they said it was to combat people feeling like Brig was a must-pick character, when Brig has one of the lowest pick rates in the entire game, which makes absolutely no sense, as I have heard nobody say that Brig felt like a must-pick character ever. She was just performing well because he had good matchups against most of the tanks that were good in the meta, and also was not picked very often, so she wasn't being forced into matchups that she wasn't good against that often. And then all the nerf ended up being was reverting the random buff that they gave her like 2 patches prior for absolutely no reason. Again, it's just wild what the patch notes end up looking like sometimes. And the Mauga one is no exception. It's kind of really bad changes because they're just trying stuff because they seem to not understand why the character is not fun, both to play as and play against. I've seen people be like, tanks can't have fun, but like Mauga makes tanks not have fun. He is such a one-dimensional character that he's not fun to play as, and he's not fun to play against because his playstyle is centered basically only around destroying the enemy tank as quickly as possible. The entire flaw in Mauga's design is that the only way that he can sustain himself in a fight is by constantly dealing damage. This means that you basically get obliterated and die if you aren't just holding down both mouse buttons on the enemy team's tank constantly. Of course, having basically Bastion, but he's a tank, trying to mow you down the entire game is not exactly fun to play against. And it's not really that fun to play as either because you just don't really have anything else to do. If you want to try and make a play, try and kill a squishy by just firing one weapon, you're just gonna die. All of his sustain is just locked behind holding buttons on the enemy tank, and that's all you can basically do as him if you don't want to be playing Respawn Simulator. So what did Blizzard do about this? Well, they just nerfed his entire damage by like a lot, basically 20% less damage now, meaning that he's even worse against ranged and squishy targets now because he just deals basically no damage if he's not firing both weapons at the same time. And then they also increased the number of bullets that you needed to hit to light someone on fire. Again, a change that doesn't really impact him against tanks that much because tanks are very easy to hit, but does certainly make it much more difficult to try and fight enemies that are at a decent range, which is what the fun part of playing him is. One of the most fun parts of playing as Mauga is actually trying to use your minigun separately and trying to take a fight against a ranged hero or force them back. And his ability to do that is now completely crippled, when realistically it should have been buffed in some way, and it still does not fix the problem with his kit that he basically is forced into just holding buttons on the enemy tank constantly or he dies. What they need to do to fix this character is they need to take some of his survivability and move it away from dealing damage and away from Cardiac Overdrive and just put it into his kit. Instead of Cardiac Overdrive giving him damage resist, just have him have a bunch of armor. They already gave him some. Just make, like half of his health bar armor or something, and then just remove the damage resistance from Cardiac Overdrive. And I feel like that will be good because Cardiac Overdrive is low-key one of the stupidest abilities in the entire game. It is better than any support ability in the game. It is fucking insane, but it's not really utilized because we're not seeing him be played in competitive yet. Just the fact that you can have an ability that gives nearby allies 30% damage reduction and also 70% lifesteal on any damage they deal is absolutely ridiculous. If you want to break the game wide open, you just take Mauga, you put a Bastion in front of him, you have them work together so that Bastion uses form when Mauga uses Cardiac Overdrive. That Bastion will be unkillable. That Bastion will self-heal for 300 health per second, basically a transcendence, and also have 50% damage reduction. This ability is so stupid if you start to look into actively trying to abuse it with your team. This ability has to be changed so they can just take some of the power that they remove from it and just give it back to Mauga in other ways that make him a better character to play as and more fun to play against. The other thing that they can do, if the problem is that he's dealing too much damage to tanks, then instead of nerfing the damage of his weapons individually, just nerf the fire rate when you're firing both at the same time, so that his maximum damage output when using both weapons is lower, but he still has a decent amount of damage when only using one at a time, because I think that using the weapons from range and swapping between them and using them individually is much more fun than just holding down both buttons and just letting God decide with the massive amount of spread that these guns have. You have firing them both at one time reduce the fire rate of each of them, which I think is actually something that they had when we could beta test him, but then they removed it when they launched him into the actual game at the start of Season 8. Again, just showing that I don't think they know what they're doing. That definitely needs to come back. That was something that made him good to play. Screw it, actually buff his damage. His primary up to 6 damage when it was 5 before, and then just have firing them both at the same time reduce the fire rate of each of them by 40%, so that he's just much better at range and being able to take fights against squissies and force them back, and also just better using one of his guns at a time in general, and he's not just going to delete tanks from reality when he uses both at the same time in close range. Another thing to talk about would be the nerf to the incendiary chain gun. Making it take more bullets to light someone on fire basically just makes it impossible to light anything but a tank on fire. His spread was not great even when firing only one of the chain guns, making lighting any enemy on fire at a decent range pretty difficult. And again, his entire gimmick relies upon lighting someone on fire with one chain gun and then switching to the other, and that was kind of what made him fun to play as. But requiring 15 bullets before someone gets lit on fire means that even with perfect tracking and hitting every single bullet when they do actually have a pretty decent amount of spread to them is going to take at least 2 seconds of being able to hit them and not missing a single shot, which just makes him even worse against squishy targets with very small hitboxes, which he was already bad against before, which means that now he's even more forced into just being a tank destroyer tank, which, as I said before, not fun to play as because it's just a very one-dimensional playstyle and not very fun to play against because as the enemy tank, you're just going to have to deal with that all game. It's like if they wanted to make fire less common against tanks, they can just have it be a tank exclusive thing. To say it takes 10 bullets to light a DPS or support on fire, and like 20 bullets to light a tank on fire. That would be fair. They've done stuff like that before with Sleep Dart, and I think that it's a very good thing that they could do. If they have a problem with something only being used against a specific role, then I think that it would be completely fine for them to add in modifiers so that the ability does not impact that role as harshly while still impacting the other roles the same because it wasn't that much of a problem against them. I feel like the other thing is that Mauga's fire isn't even that dangerous. It's basically just a tool for him to get the critical hits on his other chain gun. Just for reference, comparing Mauga's fire to the fire from Dynamite. The fire from Dynamite, just the damage from the damage over time afterwards, not even including the damage from the initial explosion. Dynamite deals 100 damage over 5 seconds, a rate of 5 damage per second. Mauga's fire deals 45 damage over 3 seconds, a rate of only 15 damage per second. And realistically, I think it's very fair that you could drop this down even further and just have it be 30 damage over 3 seconds, a rate of 10 damage per second, because it doesn't need to deal a lot of damage over time. The whole point is to play into his gimmick of having these 2 different chain guns with different attributes that you then have to make the choice to swap between them. If you wanted to lean even more into the gimmick, which I think could be fun, you could actually have the chain guns deal different amounts of damage. You could make the incendiary chain gun only deal 4 damage and then make the one that crits burning enemies deal 6 damage. That way, in situations where you are fighting a squishy and can only use one chain gun at a time, you have to make the decision of, do I just want the raw higher damage from the volatile chain gun, or do I want to use the weaker incendiary chain gun to light them on fire so that I can then kill them much quicker with the volatile one? And then in terms of his other abilities, I feel like Overrun is fine. I have done several videos about how you can do insane rollouts to get to good high ground and other positions with it. It just sucks that a lot of these rollouts are not very practical just because of how bad Mauga is if you're trying to, you know, play him at range with the single fire chain guns. He just does not have the sustain to do that. He just plays frontline, pulls both buttons down, looks at the enemy tank, and that's all he does. And then he just presses the E button when he starts to run low on health, so he gets 70% lifesteal and damage reduction. But the one thing is these are kind of just early thoughts that are only based off of having him available in quick play. When he hits ranked in a few days, I think it'll probably be next Tuesday that he's actually available for play in competitive. Then we'll actually be able to see him played in a setting where people are going to try their asses off. And I feel like we will see a GOAT like meta because of Mauga. Right now, people are just playing him very much for fun and using his cooldown very greedily. But like 30% damage reduction, 70% lifesteal for all allies. I feel like Mauga as a support character for a couple of tanky DPS heroes is going to absolutely slap a lot of stuff in the game. Like, imagine trying to play against something like Brig, Lucio, Mauga, Mei, Bastion. The Mauga is going to time his E with the speed boost and Bastion transformation, and then they're just gonna run at you. In that case, I don't even think you ever fire both chain guns at the same time, or even one of them for that matter, because you need to be in range of your team so that they can get the buff. I think Mauga's is going to kind of be a support character, and then once you are in a fight, he can just turn on both chain guns and try to shred the enemy team's tank. Especially if the enemy team is running a Reinhardt or any other tank with a barrier, Mauga can be very effective in helping destroy that so that the rest of his team can go deal damage. But that's more just theory crafting. It's hard to tell if this comp will have any major weaknesses or even perform that well at all. It's just an idea based around how stupid it is that Mauga can just give his entire team lifesteal and damage resistance for 5 full seconds. People talked about Commanding Shout like it was insane. Commanding Shout gives 50 temporary health and then also a speed boost and only lasts for like 3 seconds. Cardiac Overdrive lasts for almost twice as long and also is on a lower cooldown, and it's not temporary, it is a permanent 30% damage resist and 70% lifesteal while the ability is active. I feel like the meta comp might be something that just exploits that in some way because goddamn, that's absolutely insane to think about just from a numbers perspective. So I think that's it for now. I just wanted to talk about Mauga for a bit and how Blizzard does not understand this character. So hopefully you enjoyed. I'll be excited to see how well he actually does in ranked play when he comes out, because he's probably going to be either a throw pick or be absolutely insane. So I'll probably talk about him again then. But until then, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and until next time, see ya.